The alarm bells rang through the Galactic Council headquarters for the first time in over 200 years. In the massive control room filled with floating holographic displays, dozens of alien species worked frantically at their stations. The blue-skinned Veltar pressed his three-fingered hands against the main console, his large eyes widening with each new report that appeared on screen. "Another system just went dark," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the humming machinery. "That makes 17 in just 3 weeks." The holographic map showed a terrifying pattern. Where once bright dots had represented thriving colonies and mining operations, now there was nothing but empty black space. The Kepler mining colonies, home to over 50 million beings from 12 different species, had simply vanished. No emergency broadcasts, no calls for help, no survivors trying to escape, just silence. High Chancellor Morden approached the display, his 4 arms moving nervously as he examined the data. His species had evolved from peaceful tree-dwellers, and violence was almost unknown to them. For 8 centuries, the Galactic Council had maintained peace through diplomacy and trade agreements. Wars were ancient history, something that primitive species did before they learned to cooperate. "Show me the last transmission from Kepler 7, Morden requested, his voice shaking slightly. The hologram shifted to show a recorded message from 3 days ago. A human-like alien appeared, speaking rapidly in the universal trade language. "Everything normal here at the mining facility. Production quotas exceeded by 12% this quarter. The new deep core extractors are working perfectly. See you next month when the supply ships arrive." That was it. The last anyone had heard from 50 million souls. "Sir, the investigation fleet is requesting permission to jump to hyperspace," announced another council member from across the room. Morden nodded slowly. "Tell them to proceed, but maintain maximum distance. Use only automated probes for the initial survey." 3 hours later, the investigation fleet arrived at what used to be the Kepler system. Commander Zethra, a veteran explorer who had mapped dozens of systems, had never seen anything like it. The massive space stations that once processed millions of tons of rare metals were still there, but they looked like empty shells. The hull plating remained intact, but everything inside had been stripped away. "Run a detailed scan," ordered his science officer. "I want to know what happened to all the organic matter." The results were disturbing. Every trace of biological material had been removed with surgical precision. Food supplies, medical supplies, even the organic components of the computer systems had vanished. But the strangest part was how clean everything looked. There were no signs of explosions, no blast marks, no evidence of a battle. "It's like something just ... ate everything alive," the science officer reported, his voice filled with disbelief. Similar reports came in from all 17 dead systems. Whatever had done this wasn't interested in destroying planets or stealing technology. It wanted something far more precious and terrifying. It wanted life itself. Back at the council headquarters, Morden stared at the growing dark zone on their galactic map. More systems were going silent every day, and whatever was causing this was moving in a straight line toward the most populated regions of known space. At this rate, they had maybe 6 months before it reached the core worlds where trillions of beings lived in peace and prosperity. For the first time in 8 centuries of peaceful rule, the Galactic Council faced something that diplomacy couldn't solve. Ambassador Kethra had spent 40 years perfecting the art of first contact. His species, the tall and graceful Altarians, were natural diplomats who had successfully welcomed over 30 different alien races into the Galactic Council. He stood on the bridge of Harmony's Voice, the most advanced diplomatic vessel ever built, feeling confident that whatever intelligence they were about to meet could be reasoned with. "Begin transmission of the Universal Peace Protocols," he ordered his communications officer. The bridge hummed with activity as crew members from 7 different species worked together, each contributing their unique skills to what they hoped would be another peaceful first contact. The massive ship, nearly 2 kilometers long and painted in the traditional white and gold colors of peace, slowly approached the edge of the dark zone. Its sensors had detected massive objects moving through space, clearly artificial and clearly intelligent. Whatever had consumed 17 star systems was about to show itself. "Sir, we're detecting multiple large contacts ahead," reported the sensor operator, a 6-armed creature whose species excelled at reading complex data. They single quotes, unusual. The readings suggest they're partially organic. Kethra nodded calmly. Organic technology is not uncommon. The Botanical Alliance uses living ships very successfully. Begin broadcasting the mathematical sequences on all frequencies. The standard first contact package was something the Council had perfected over centuries. Mathematical constants that any intelligent species would recognize, followed by star charts showing the location of peaceful worlds, and finally, artistic representations showing the diversity and beauty of galactic civilization. It had never failed to establish basic communication. For several minutes, they transmitted into the darkness, waiting for a response. Then the sensors detected movement. Something enormous was approaching them, something that made their diplomatic cruiser look like a small shuttle by comparison. "Visual contact established," announced the sensor operator, and the main screen filled with an image that made everyone on the bridge step backward in horror. The ship approaching them wasn't built, it had grown. Massive organic curves twisted through space, covered in what looked like armor plating that pulsed with its own heartbeat. Tentacles the size of city blocks writhed around its hull, and worst of all, parts of it were clearly made from the wreckage of other ships. The metals and technologies of dozens of different species had been absorbed and integrated into its living structure. "Continue transmitting," Kethra ordered, though his voice now carried a tremor he couldn't hide. "All intelligent species can be reasoned with. That's the foundation of our entire civilization." The alien ship responded, but not with words or mathematics. A massive tendril, easily 300 meters wide, shot out from its hull and struck Harmony's voice with incredible speed. The diplomatic vessel's shields, designed to protect against space debris and radiation, simply vanished on contact. The bridge crew had just enough time to scream before the organic cable punched through the hull like it was made of paper. Smaller tendrils immediately began spreading throughout the ship, and the crew members who were caught by them simply dissolved. Their screams cut off as their bodies were broken down into basic organic compounds. Kethra, trapped in his command chair by writhing alien flesh, managed to activate the emergency transmission system with his last conscious act. The message that reached the Galactic Council was brief and terrifying. "We are the Devourers," the voice said, and it wasn't coming from any mechanical speaker. The ship itself was speaking, using the vocal cords and lungs it had just absorbed. "Surrender your flesh. Resistance feeds us." The transmission ended as Harmony's voice was completely consumed, its 2-kilometer hull disappearing into the belly of something that treated advanced starships like snacks. Within hours, the Council's emergency military fleets arrived at the location, only to find empty space and a growing swarm of organic ships that had already begun moving toward the next populated system. The peacekeeping vessels, armed with non-lethal crowd control weapons and designed for stopping pirates and smugglers, found themselves facing an enemy that consumed everything they fired at it. For the first time in 8 centuries, the Galactic Council realized that some problems couldn't be solved with words. The Great Assembly Hall of the Galactic Council had never seen such chaos. Representatives from 200 different species filled the massive chamber, their voices creating a symphony of panic in dozens of languages. Some were crying, others were shouting demands, and a few had already begun making plans to flee to the furthest reaches of the galaxy. High Chancellor Morden stood at the center podium, his 4 arms hanging limply at his sides. In 8 centuries of peaceful rule, no chancellor had ever had to deliver news like this. His usually pristine robes were wrinkled from sleepless nights, and his large eyes were bloodshot from staring at tactical displays that showed nothing but defeat after defeat. "Silence," he called out, but his voice cracked. The assembled representatives continued their panicked discussions. "Silence," he roared, using a tone that his peaceful species rarely employed. The hall finally quieted, 200 pairs of alien eyes focusing on their leader. "In the past month, we have lost 47 star systems," Morden began, his voice echoing through the chamber. "Our greatest diplomatic minds have been consumed. Our most advanced peacekeeping fleets have been destroyed or absorbed into their growing swarm. Every weapon we possess has proven useless against these devourers." A representative from the crystalline worlds, her body made of living mineral, spoke up with a voice like breaking glass. "What about the old war machines? The museum pieces from the ancient conflicts?" "We tried," replied Admiral Vexstar, the Council's highest military officer. "The archived weapons from the species wars were deployed 3 days ago. Plasma cannons, gravity bombs, even the banned quantum torpedoes. The Devourers didn't just survive the attacks. They absorbed our energy weapons and grew stronger." A wave of despair swept through the assembly. Several smaller species began weeping openly, knowing their homeworlds would be among the first consumed when the swarm reached the inner systems. Council member Zetra, an ancient being whose species had been part of the council since its formation, slowly raised one of her many tentacles. The hall fell silent, as everyone respected her wisdom and experience. "There is ... She paused, her voice barely above a whisper. "There is one option we have not discussed." "Speak," Morden urged. "The quarantine system, Sol 3. The humans." The reaction was immediate and visceral. Representatives recoiled as if she had suggested releasing a plague. The insectoid ambassador from Hive Cluster 7 made clicking sounds of disgust. The plant-based delegates from the garden worlds rustled their leaves in what could only be described as horror. "You cannot be serious," gasped the representative from New Pacifica. "They are monsters. Violent, unpredictable monsters who wage war against their own species for entertainment." Zetra S. Ancient eyes gazed around the assembly. "I was there during first contact, 200 years ago. I was part of the team that decided to quarantine them. We called them too aggressive, too dangerous for civilized society. Because they are," shouted another representative. "They have weapons designed specifically to kill other humans. They create art celebrating violence. They turn warfare into games for their children to play." "Yes," Zetra replied calmly. "And now we need that violence." The chamber erupted again, but this time the panic was mixed with a different kind of fear. The fear of what they might unleash. Morden raised his hands for silence. "What exactly are you proposing?" "We send them everything we know about the Devourers," Zetra explained. "We tell them that if these creatures are not stopped, every living thing in the galaxy will be consumed, including them. And you think they will help us? After 2 centuries of isolation, after we branded them as savages?" Zetra's expression was grim. "They will help because fighting is what they do. It is what they have always done. While we built a civilization based on peace and trade, they built one based on conflict and survival. We saw this as a weakness. Now it may be our only strength." Admiral Vexstar looked at the tactical displays surrounding the chamber. "Our remaining fleets have perhaps 6 weeks before the Devourers reach the core worlds. Trillions will die." The silence stretched for long minutes as 200 species contemplated asking for help from the one race they had deemed unfit for, Galactic Society. Finally, Morden spoke, his voice heavy with the weight of history. "Send the transmission to Earth. Tell them, ... He paused, struggling with words that went against everything the Council believed in. Tell them we need their warriors. Admiral Lee Jun crushed the printed message in his fist, then smoothed it out and read it again. After 2 centuries of complete radio silence from the galaxy beyond Earth's solar system, this desperate plea had arrived on every military frequency simultaneously. The aliens who had once called humanity too dangerous for civilized space were now begging for Earth's help. Sir, you need to see this, called out Communications Officer Park Dae-hai from her station. We're getting similar messages on civilian channels, academic networks, even the old deep space monitoring stations. They're broadcasting this everywhere. Lee walked to the massive viewing window of Defiance, Earth's most powerful warship. Below him, the blue marble of his home planet turned slowly in space, peaceful and unaware that somewhere out there, entire civilizations were being consumed by something called the Devourers. The bridge doors slid open, and Captain Park Min entered, still wearing her flight suit from combat training. Her short black hair was damp with sweat, and her eyes burned with the intensity that made her one of Earth's best carrier commanders. Admiral, my pilots are asking questions, she said without preamble. Word is spreading through the fleet that we might finally see real action. What kind of questions? The kind you'd expect from people who've spent their entire careers training for a war that never came. Park pulled up a holographic display, showing her carrier Thunder and its complement of fighters. 200 years of isolation, Lee. 200 years of the galaxy, telling us we're too violent to join their peaceful little club. Now they want us to save them. Lee nodded slowly. And what do you think we should do? I think, Park said, her voice growing hard, that they're about to find out why they were afraid of us in the first place. Across the solar system, similar conversations were happening on dozens of human warships. Commander Kim Yoon stood in the weapons bay of his destroyer Retribution, watching his crew load the kinetic accelerators that could punch through a moon. These weapons had been banned by galactic law for over 3 centuries, considered too destructive for civilized warfare. Sir, called out Weapons Officer Jung Minho, the new nuclear warheads are loaded and ready. Each one packs enough punch to vaporize a city. Kim ran his hand along the sleek metal casing of one torpedo. The aliens called these barbaric weapons of mass destruction during first contact. Said no civilized species would ever build such things. And now they need those same barbaric weapons to save their civilizations. Jung replied with a grim smile. On the bridge of Defiance, Admiral Lee was reviewing fleet compositions with his senior staff. 200 years of isolation had not been wasted. Earth's military had continued to evolve, continued to prepare for threats that might never come. Now it seemed that preparation would finally be put to the test. Lieutenant Choi Sora, the fleet's communications officer, looked up from her console. Admiral, we're receiving acceptance confirmations from all ships. Fleet Admiral Jong wants to know our deployment timeline. Lee looked around the bridge at faces that belonged to the descendants of every nation on Earth: Korean, Nigerian, Brazilian, Swedish, Egyptian, Japanese. Humanity had spent centuries learning to fight together instead of against each other. Now they would take those hard-earned lessons to the stars. Open a channel to all ships, Lee commanded. His voice echoed through every warship in the solar system, reaching thousands of sailors, marines, pilots, and engineers who had trained their entire lives for this moment. 2 centuries ago, our species was judged too violent for galactic society. They said we were dangerous, unpredictable, savage. Today, we prove them right. He paused, looking out at the stars, where unknown enemies waited. But we also prove that sometimes the galaxy needs dangerous people to protect the innocent. Throughout the fleet, crews began final preparations. Weapons systems came online, fighters launched for escort positions, and Marines checked their equipment one last time. Signaled the fleet, Admiral Lee announced. We jump in 6 hours. Today we find out if humanity's reputation was deserved. The flash of hyperspace exit faded from the viewports of the human fleet, revealing a scene of absolute horror. The Zarian system, once home to 12 billion peaceful aliens, had become a feeding ground. Massive bioships, each one larger than Earth's biggest city, moved through space like living nightmares. Their hulls pulsed with organic rhythms, and hundreds of tentacles reached out to grab the desperately fleeing refugee ships. Admiral Lee June watched from Defiance's bridge as a devourer ship casually wrapped its tentacles around a passenger vessel carrying thousands of civilians. The alien ship didn't explode or break apart. Instead, it simply dissolved, absorbed into the bioship's hull, while its occupants screamed on the emergency frequencies. "My God," whispered Lieutenant Choi Sora, her face pale as she monitored the distress signals. "There are children on those ships." Lee's jaw tightened. 200 years of isolation had ended with this. Humanity's first glimpse of galactic civilization was watching it be devoured alive. "Fleet-wide channel," he ordered, his voice cutting through the chaos on the bridge. "All ships, weapons free. Show them how humans fight." The response was immediate and brutal. Defiance's main guns, massive kinetic accelerators that could crack a planet's crust, opened fire on the nearest bioship. The tungsten projectiles, traveling at a significant fraction of light speed, punched through the organic hull like bullets through flesh. Green fluid erupted into space as the creature writhed in what could only be described as pain. Captain Park Min didn't wait for additional orders. Her carrier Thunder launched its full complement of fighters in a coordinated swarm that would have made her ancestors proud. These weren't the peaceful patrol craft used by galactic forces. These were war machines, built by a species that had turned aerial combat into an art form over centuries of global conflict. "Red Squadron, follow my lead," Park's voice crackled. Over the fighter comes as she led her pilots in a diving attack that no galactic military manual had ever contemplated. Hit them fast, hit them hard, and don't give them time to adapt. The Devourer bioships had consumed dozens of galactic peacekeeping fleets, always facing enemies that followed predictable formation tactics and rules of engagement. They had never encountered pilots who flew like their lives depended on individual creativity rather than group coordination. Pilot Lee Minjun rolled his fighter between two massive tentacles, his engines screaming as he pushed his craft beyond safe limits. Behind him, his wingman Kim Ruan used the explosion from Minchin's missiles as cover to launch her own attack from an impossible angle. "These things are trying to grab us like they did the other ships," Minjin reported over the comm. "But they're too slow. They can't predict what we're going to do next." The reason was simple. Every other species in the galaxy had evolved past individual combat. Their military tactics were based on group coordination and predictable patterns. Humans had spent thousands of years perfecting the art of killing each other in creative and unpredictable ways. Commander Kim Yoon proved this point as his destroyer flotilla executed a maneuver that would have horrified any galactic military academy instructor. Instead of maintaining formation and engaging at a safe distance, his ships scattered like wolves, hunting in a pack. They used asteroid debris as cover, popping out to launch nuclear torpedoes, before disappearing again into the chaos of the battlefield. "Sir, the aliens are trying to adapt their defensive patterns," reported his weapons officer, Jung Minho. "But every time they adjust to counter one ship, 3 others hit them from different angles." Kim smiled grimly as he watched one of his torpedoes detonate against a bioship's hull. The nuclear explosion, banned by galactic law as excessively destructive, tore a crater the size of a football stadium in the creature's side. "That's because they're thinking like a hive mind," Kim replied. "They expect us to think like a hive mind too. They don't understand that every human ship out here is making its own decisions." The battle that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. For the first time in their existence, the Devourers found themselves facing an enemy that couldn't be predicted, couldn't be easily adapted to, and refused to follow any logical pattern of behavior. As the human fleet carved through the bioships, with a combination of advanced technology and utterly unpredictable tactics, the surviving refugee ships began to realize something incredible was happening. The monsters that had consumed entire civilizations were losing. For the first time in months, the galaxy had hope. The Devourer bioships began to change before everyone's eyes. What had started as massive organic vessels with writhing tentacles suddenly sprouted thick armor plating where the human kinetic rounds had struck. Defensive spines grew along their hulls, and new weapon systems emerged from their flesh like tumors. "Sir, they're adapting faster than we anticipated," reported Lieutenant Choi Sora from her station on Defiance. "The bioship we damaged 10 minutes ago has completely regrown its damaged sections." Admiral Lee watched through the main viewer as one of the creatures literally grew, a new weapon system, sprouting what looked like organic missile launchers from its side. The projectiles it fired weren't mechanical, but living things that moved through space like hunting animals. "They're learning from every hit we land," he muttered. But can they learn from this? What Lee was counting on was something the Devourers had never encountered in their conquest of peaceful civilizations. Human unpredictability wasn't just about tactics or formations. It was about individual creativity under pressure, the kind that came from a species that had spent millennia fighting wars against itself. On the lower decks of Defiance, Marine Colonel Han Du-Wan was putting this creativity to its most extreme test. His boarding party had successfully captured samples of Devourer biomatter during a previous engagement, and now he was using humanity's knowledge of biological warfare to turn it against its creators. "Sir, the samples are responding exactly as predicted," reported Sergeant Lim Yu-jin, carefully handling a container of what looked like living metal. "The biomatter is trying to adapt to our weapons, but we're introducing conflicting adaptation signals." Han nodded grimly. During Earth's long history of warfare, humans had learned to weaponize everything, including biology itself. "Release the modified samples into their ship's atmosphere. Let's see how they handle fighting their own adaptive systems." The boarding party moved through corridors that literally tried to digest them. The walls secreted acid, the floor attempted to trap their feet, and the ceiling dropped organic nets. But Han's Marines came prepared with flamethrowers that turned the living ship's defenses into weaknesses, and acid charges that ate through the biomatter faster than it could regenerate. "These things have never fought someone who boards their ships," shouted Corporal Kang Suben over the sound of her Mithra. "Every other species just shoots at them from a distance." Meanwhile, Engineer Major Song Ji-hai was demonstrating another uniquely human approach to warfare. Her engineering crews had been working frantically to turn damaged human ships into weapons. Not repairs, but deliberate modifications that would make them more dangerous as they died. "The Courage lost main power 20 minutes ago," she reported to Admiral Lee over the comm, "but her reactor is still stable. With your permission, sir, I'd like to turn her into the galaxy's most expensive bomb." "Granted," Lee replied without hesitation. "Make it count." Song's team evacuated the crew from the disabled destroyer, then rigged its nuclear reactor to overload in a very specific way. Instead of simply exploding, the ship would release all its energy in a focused beam designed to punch through bioship armor. It was the kind of desperate tactic that no civilized military would ever attempt. The Courage accelerated toward the largest Devourer ship under autopilot, its hull already glowing from the barely contained reactor overload. The tentacles reached out to grab what it thought was another easy meal. Instead, it got a nuclear explosion delivered directly into its core systems. In the fighter squadrons, individual pilots were making their own creative decisions. Captain Oh Sang-ho found himself in a damaged fighter, his engines failing and his weapons nearly depleted. Any reasonable pilot would have ejected and waited for rescue. Instead, O studied his tactical display and noticed something the bioship hadn't protected. Deep inside its organic hull was what looked like a nerve center, a cluster of neural tissue that seemed to coordinate the creature's movements. It was too small for ship weapons to target, but a fighter moving at maximum speed might be able to reach it. "Control, this is Oh Sung-ho," he said calmly into his comm. "I'm making a run at the bioship's control node. Tell my family I love them." Before anyone could respond, Oh pushed his dying fighter into a terminal dive toward the creature's hull. His fighter punched through layers of organic armor, its hull disintegrating from the bioship's defensive systems, but momentum carried him deep enough to reach his target. The explosion was small by space battle standards, but it severed the neural connections that coordinated the massive bioship's movements. The creature went into convulsions, its tentacles thrashing wildly as it lost control of its own body. Throughout the battle, similar acts of individual creativity played out as human crews found ways to fight that the devourer hive mind simply couldn't predict or counter. They turned their own damaged ships into weapons, used captured biomatter against its creators, and made split-second decisions that no military doctrine had ever covered. For a hive mind that had conquered hundreds of species by adapting to their predictable military tactics, facing an enemy where every individual thought differently was like trying to solve a million different puzzles simultaneously. The humans were proving that sometimes the best weapon against overwhelming adaptability was complete unpredictability. The captured bioship sample writhed in the containment field like a living nightmare, but it had already revealed its secrets. Dr. Yoon Ha-jin, the fleet's xenobiologist, had spent 3 sleepless days extracting information from the organic neural networks, and what she found changed everything about their understanding of the enemy. "Admiral, you need to see this," she said, her voice hoarse from exhaustion as she activated the holographic display in Defiance's main briefing room. The image that appeared made every officer in the room step backward. It was a structure so massive that their minds struggled to comprehend its scale. A living moon, covered in organic spires and feeding tentacles, slowly devouring a star. The stellar matter flowed into the creature like water into a drain, providing energy for something that defied all natural laws. "This is their homeworld," Dr. Yoon explained, her hands shaking as she manipulated the display. "But it's not a planet in any sense we understand. It's a single living organism the size of Earth's moon, and it's been consuming stars for thousands of years." Admiral Lee studied the nightmare before him. The structure was covered in what looked like cities, but closer examination revealed them to be organs, massive biological systems that processed the stellar energy and converted it into new bioships. Millions of the smaller devourer vessels swarmed around it, like antibodies protecting a vital organ. "How many ships are we looking at?" asked Captain Parkman, her pilot's mind already calculating attack vectors. "Conservative estimate, over 50,000 bioships in defensive positions," Dr. Yoon replied. "But here's the crucial part. The neural network shows that most of their main fleet is scattered across the galaxy, consuming other star systems. Right now, this homeworld is more lightly defended than it's been in centuries." Commander Kim Yoon leaned forward, studying the tactical display. "What kind of defenses are we talking about?" "Organic shields that can absorb energy weapons, defensive batteries that fire living projectiles, and something they call void feeders that can apparently eat space itself." Dr. Yoon paused, looking around the room at faces that showed no fear, only determination. "Gentlemen, this thing has been the apex predator of the galaxy for millennia. No species has ever gotten close to it." Admiral Lee stood silent for several minutes, his mind processing the impossible nature of what they were considering. Around the table sat the commanders of humanity's remaining fleet. They had started with over 200 ships. Now, after weeks of running battles across multiple star systems, they had less than 50 vessels still capable of combat. "Sir," said Captain Park quietly. With respect, this is suicide. Even if we somehow penetrated their defenses, we don't have enough firepower to damage something that size. No, Lee replied, his voice steady. We don't have enough firepower to destroy it, but we might have enough to kill it. He activated a different section of the holographic display, showing the homeworld's internal structure. Deep inside the organic mass was what looked like a brain, a massive neural cluster that coordinated not just the homeworld, but every devourer ship in the galaxy. According to the bioship's memories, this central nervous system controls their entire species. It's how they maintain coordination across thousands of light years. If we can reach it, if we can damage it severely enough, the entire species dies, finished Commander Kim, understanding immediately, like cutting the head off a snake. Exactly. But getting there means fighting through 50,000 bioships, penetrating organic armor designed to withstand stellar radiation, and somehow delivering a nuclear payload to a target buried inside a moon-sized creature. The room fell silent as each officer contemplated the magnitude of what was being proposed. It wasn't just a desperate gambit. It was asking them to attempt something that violated every principle of military strategy. Captain Park was the first to speak. My fighters can clear a path through their outer defenses. We'll draw off as many bioships as possible. Give the main fleet a corridor to punch through. Commander Kim nodded grimly. The destroyers still have nuclear torpedoes. We can punch through their inner shell, create a breach for the larger ships, and I'll take Defiance straight into the heart of that thing, Admiral Lee concluded. Overload every reactor we have right in the center of their brain. Dr. Yoon looked around the room at these humans, who were calmly discussing their own deaths. You understand that the odds of survival are essentially zero. This creature has been consuming civilizations since before your species discovered fire. Admiral Lee smiled, and for the first time in weeks, it was a genuine expression of human confidence. Doctor, you've spent your career studying alien biology, but you're about to see something no other species in this galaxy possesses. What's that, Admiral? The human willingness to die for people we've never met. Fighting an enemy we just learned existed, to save a galaxy that spent 2 centuries calling us monsters. Around the table, his officers nodded in agreement. In 6 hours, they would attempt something that no military strategist would ever approve, against odds that made victory mathematically impossible. But they were human, and impossible had never stopped them before. The dying star cast an eerie red glow across the human fleet as they approached, the most horrifying sight any of them had ever witnessed. The devourer homeworld hung in space like a cancerous growth, its surface covered in organic spires that pulsed with stolen stellar energy. Massive feeding tubes extended from the creature's hull, drawing the star's plasma directly into its body, while smaller tentacles writhed in space around it, like the arms of a drowning giant. Jesus Christ, whispered pilot Lee Min-jun over the fighter squadron. Come. It's actually eating the sun. Admiral Lee stood on Defiance's bridge, watching as thousands of bioships began emerging from organic ports along the homeworld's surface. Each one was the size of a city block, and they moved with the coordinated precision of an immune system responding to an infection. Sir, we're detecting massive energy buildups across the creature's surface, reported Lieutenant Choi Sora, her voice tight with barely controlled fear. It's charging some kind of defensive system. All ships, remember the plan, Lee broadcast to his fleet. We have one chance at this. Make it count. Captain Parkman's voice crackled over the com from her fighter Lightning. Red Squadron, Blue Squadron, follow me in. We're going to show these things what a real fighter attack looks like. Her remaining 30 fighters accelerated toward the swarm of bioships, in a formation that would have made any military academy instructor weep. Instead of the neat, predictable attack patterns used by galactic forces, the human pilots scattered like leaves in a hurricane, each one choosing their own approach vector. The Devourers had evolved their defensive tactics over thousands of years, learning to counter every known form of coordinated attack. But they had never faced pilots who deliberately broke formation and attacked as individuals. The bioship's targeting systems, designed to track predictable group movements, couldn't keep up with 30 different pilots making 30 different decisions. "I'm hit," shouted pilot Kim Ruan as organic projectiles tore through her fighter's wing. But instead of retreating, she rolled her damaged craft into a kamikaze dive toward one of the larger bioships. "Tell my kids I love them." The explosion created a gap in the enemy formation that 3 other fighters immediately exploited, racing through the breach toward the homeworld's surface. Behind them, the remaining pilots continued their chaotic attack, drawing off hundreds of bioships that might otherwise have threatened the main fleet. Commander Kim Yoon's destroyer flotilla formed the spear point of the assault, their hulls already beginning to smoke as they entered the homeworld's acidic atmosphere. The creature's outer shell secreted defensive chemicals that could dissolve metal, but the human ships pressed forward anyway. "Hull integrity at 60% and fallen," reported his weapons officer, Jung Minho. "Sir, we're not going to make it through in one piece." "We don't need to make it through in one piece," Kim replied grimly. "We just need to make it through." His lead destroyer, Retribution, fired its full complement of nuclear torpedoes point-blank into the organic shell, creating a series of explosions that tore massive craters in the homeworld's surface. Green fluid geysered into space as the creature writhed in pain, but the wounds were already beginning to heal. "Second wave, target the same spots," Kim ordered. "Don't let it regenerate." The remaining destroyers followed his lead, their hulls dissolving around them as they poured everything they had into the breach. One by one, the ships began to break apart under the assault of the homeworld's defenses, but not before they had torn a hole large enough for the dreadnought to pass through. Admiral Lee took manual control of Defiance as his ship plunged into the organic tunnel his destroyers had carved. The walls around them pulsed with alien life, trying to close the wound and trap them inside. Smaller defensive organisms, like living antibodies the size of fighter craft, swarmed around the massive ship. "Engineering, I need everything you can give me," Lee called out over the ship's intercom. "Divert power from life support, weapons, everything. All power to engines." "Sir, the hull is starting to buckle," reported Chief Engineer Park Da-won. "The acid is eating through our armor faster than we can compensate." Through the bridge windows, Lee could see their destination. Deep inside the homeworld's core, a massive brain-like structure pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that seemed to extend throughout the entire creature. It was beautiful in an alien way, like a living galaxy contained within organic tissue. "There," he pointed toward the neural cluster. "That's where we end this." Lieutenant Choi Sora looked up from her station with tears in her eyes. "Admiral, we're receiving transmissions from across the galaxy. Every species, every world that's still free. They're watching us. What are they saying? They're saying thank you, sir. They're saying goodbye." Defiance continued its plunge toward the homeworld's brain, its hull glowing red-hot from the acid assault. Behind them, the tunnel began to collapse as the creature's healing systems activated. There would be no way out. But ahead of them lay the heart of an enemy that had consumed civilizations for millennia. In a few minutes, they would find out if human determination could kill something that had never known defeat. The final gamble of humanity's first and last fleet was about to reach its conclusion. The emergency klaxons screamed through defiance as Admiral Lee Jun walked slowly through corridors filled with smoke and the acrid smell of melting metal. His crew rushed past him toward the escape pods, their faces grim but determined. They knew what was coming, and they knew their admiral wasn't coming with them. "Sir, please." Lieutenant Choi Sora grabbed his arm as she passed. "There's still room in Pod 7. We can set the ship on autopilot." Lee shook his head. looking around at the bridge that had been his home for the past 5 years. Someone needs to make sure we hit the target exactly right. 1 degree off and this whole sacrifice means nothing. Through the cracked viewport, the Devourer's brain pulsed with alien patterns of light. It was massive beyond comprehension, a neural network that had coordinated the consumption of entire civilizations for thousands of years. Now it was less than 2 minutes away from Defiance's dying engines. All remaining ships. This is Admiral Lee. He spoke into his communicator one last time. Clear the blast radius immediately. What's about to happen here will be felt across the entire galaxy. Captain Park Min's voice crackled back through the static, filled with emotion. Admiral, it's been the greatest honor of my life, serving under your command. The honor was mine, Captain. Take care of our people. Take them home. The bridge fell silent, except for the sound of failing systems, and the deep groaning of a hull that was slowly dissolving in bioacid. Lee sat down in his command chair and placed his hands on the manual controls. In the distance, he could hear the last escape pod launching, carrying the final survivors away from Ground Zero. Defiance accelerated toward the brain, its engines pushing beyond every safety limit. The organic walls around them pulsed faster, as if the homeworld was finally beginning to understand what was happening. But it was too late. The human dreadnought had already penetrated too deep into the creature's core to be stopped. Computer, activate final protocol, Lee said quietly. Final protocol activated. All nuclear warheads armed. Detonation in 30 seconds. Lee closed his eyes and thought about Earth, about the blue skies and oceans he would never see again. He thought about his sister back home, about the children who would grow up in a galaxy free from the Devourers because of what happened here today. 10 seconds to detonation. The massive brain loomed ahead of them, its bioluminescent patterns now flashing in what could only be panic. For the first time in its existence, the controlling intelligence of the Devourer species was experiencing fear. 5 seconds. Lee opened his eyes and smiled. For humanity. Defiance plunged into the heart of the neural cluster, just as every nuclear warhead in its arsenal detonated simultaneously. The explosion was more than just physical destruction. The brain had been connected to every Devourer ship across the galaxy through some form of psychic link, and when it died, that connection became a channel for its death screams. Across thousands of light years, every bioship suddenly convulsed as their controlling intelligence was ripped away. The creatures that had consumed entire star systems simply stopped functioning, drifting dead in space like the corpses they had always been, on the bridge of Carrier Thunder. Captain Park watched through tears as the homeworld collapsed in on itself. The massive organic structure that had fed on stars for millennia was dying, its stolen energy bleeding out into space in streams of brilliant light. All ships, report status, she commanded, her voice steady despite the grief. Valor reporting. Engines damaged but functional. Courage here. We lost main weapons but we're alive. Hope, reporting in. Ready to go home, Captain. Park looked around at the 17 ships that remained from humanity's greatest fleet. They had started with over 200 vessels and thousands of crew members. Now, they were returning with barely enough people to fill a single ship's complement. But they were returning with something no human had ever brought back from space before, the gratitude of an entire galaxy. 3 months later, Captain Park stood on the observation deck of the rebuilt Thunder as it approached Earth orbit. Behind her, representatives from over 100 alien species waited nervously for their first official visit to humanity's homeworld. The quarantine had been lifted the day after the Devourer homeworld died. Now, instead of being considered too dangerous for civilized space, humanity was being welcomed as the protectors of galactic peace. Trade agreements, defense pacts, and cultural exchanges were being proposed by species that had once crossed the galaxy to avoid human space. But Park knew the truth that these aliens were still learning. Humanity hadn't become the galaxy's protectors because they were peaceful. They had earned that role because when peaceful people needed someone to do terrible things to terrible enemies, they called the humans. Admiral Lee Jun's sacrifice had saved trillions of lives, but it had also forever changed humanity's place in the universe. They were no longer the quarantined savages. They were the ones you called when the monsters under the bed turned out to be real, and everyone in the galaxy slept better knowing that somewhere in the Sol system, Earth's warriors were still standing watch.